Welcome to the Dibley Diaries for this week. I have waited for it to cool down and now it's a little bit breezy, so I'm hoping this is all going to be fine, but if it's a bit wind noise, I am sorry. I couldn't possibly have filmed while it was hot earlier in the day today. This week in the Rural Challenge, I want us to think about what happens when things go well. That's because we're looking at the parable of the sower this week, and Jesus talks about all these times when we're preaching the good news about Jesus, and he says, well, this might happen and this might happen. There's lots and lots of negative things, but what happens if it goes well? How prepared are we for if it goes well? Because this sometimes can be a problem. So if you're organising something, what is your plan for if it goes well? What is your process for moving people on? So sometimes people have like local missions. Well, what happens if that goes well? What do you do with people? What do you do with the people who come at the end of the Alpha course, who want to stay committed into the church community? How do you integrate them into your church community? What do you do if your children's and youth work suddenly becomes very popular? How do you cope with that? And that's been a real challenge to me this week. I've been thinking about it because often I hear again and again, oh, we tried that, it didn't work. Sometimes people go into something thinking, oh, this isn't going to work. We've tried this before, it doesn't work. It's not going to be any more successful this time. But actually, what do you do if something does go well? If, as in the parable of the sower, something does really grow very, very well, what do we do with that? How do we cope with that? How do we put plans in place that actually, if our mission initiative is very successful, what is that going to look like? Or even if our mission initiative is moderately successful, how are we going to nurture people onwards? What are we going to do with success when we are reaching out to people? Thought for the week this week is to do with the two passages of the parable of the sower from Matthew 13. I'll put the link in the description. So we have the parable which Jesus tells, and we have the explanation of it which Jesus gives about how actually it's all to do with people spreading the good news, sowing the good news of the kingdom, and that it grows really well in some places and it doesn't grow in others. There are more places which are listed where it doesn't grow well, so it might get scorched, it might fall on rocky ground, it might grow really vigorously but then not have big enough roots, or it might grow really well. So we have this parable and this understanding of the parable, and it's all about Jesus talking about sowing the good news of the kingdom, and that's our job. That's our job as people of God, is to tell people about the kingdom of God, to tell people the good news of Jesus, and to see what happens. That's our job as all the people of the church. Now, this week I've really been thinking about industrial scale farming and allotments. The Dibley moment this week is about an allotment problem, but I just have been thinking about this difference between industrial farming and industrial planting and what people grow on allotments. So I think there was a tendency with modernity to trust the evangelizing, the telling of the good news of Jesus to the professionals, whoever they were, who would get in the equivalent of their tractor and they would plant wholesale seeds of the kingdom. And I'm really interested in that, and I've been reflecting, well, there were some things that were really good about that. I am just about old enough to have once been to a Billy Graham rally, and that was evangelism on a truly industrial size. And we think about those sorts of things. We think about the big recruitments, the big preachings of the gospel, the big understandings of what that was. And there's still some kind of analogies for that now. So sometimes we get to speak to a lot of people when we're vicars or broadcasting professionals, or whether we're doing a lot of schools work. There are lots of people for us to talk to about the good news of Jesus. There might be 100 people, there might be 500 people. If we're doing any sort of broadcasting, it might be more people. And we tend to leave that to, the vicars, the professionals, people who are paid to do it, people with theological understanding. And I've talked before a bit about how actually there's some evidence that the way that evangelism works now is different, and it takes people a lot longer to make a decision, a commitment to following Jesus than maybe it did a while ago. And I think this is much more like allotment gardening, where somebody plants something and they nurture it, they look after it, they inspect it, they're kind of seeing what is growing, they are taking care of it on a much more individual basis. They are thinking, is this thriving? Am I giving this plant the best opportunity to grow? Am I really nurturing it? And so Jesus says, actually, you're planting and some of it will grow and some of it won't. And the sort of broadcasting that he talks about, the throwing the seed wide, was a much less industrial process anyway, because people would know their land. If they're broadcasting, throwing seed from a cloth apron essentially, they're not throwing it very far. They know where it's going, they see how it's growing, they kind of nurture it in that way, much more than if we rely on the kind of big industrialisation of evangelism to other people, to the professionals, to the person driving the equivalent of the tractor of evangelism. So I think it's a real challenge for us as communities and individuals. So I'm the vicar. I don't want to leave the telling of the good news just to me, if I'm the vicar, or to my clergy colleagues or my other minister colleagues, because actually you know better the people that you are interacting with, that you are speaking to, that you are nurturing as you grow. So think about it. Think about who it is that you might be called to plant the seed of the gospel with. How do you share the good news with people? How do you talk to people about the good news? How do you wait and see if it grows in their lives? Now, it may or may not grow in their lives, but it's actually not just the responsibility of the kind of vicar or professional. It's the responsibility of us all. The kingdom of God grows much more like a small holding or an allotment than like a huge multi-acre farm. So who is it that each of us is trying to nurture into faith? It might not grow. Jesus talks a lot in the parable of the sower about things which don't grow, and that's okay. But actually, what are we planting? How are we nurturing it? And how are we preaching about the good news of Jesus? The Dibley moment of the week this week is something which has happened very recently in one of the villages where I work. So there's been a message on the Facebook group saying somebody is mysteriously stealing produce from other people's gardens, and I assume from the allotments as well. And it's just a little warning to say, keep an eye out for things going missing. This is something which is happening. And I'm really intrigued by this because I think it's quite unusual. It's never happened anywhere I've been before. I wonder if it is a person or if it is in fact a deer, but there may well be someone who is just thinking, well, those raspberries look good, and helping themselves. I really hope this is not the case. But as I say, never happened before, the mysterious produce stealing from one place. Well, that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week where you can see the kingdom of God growing in amongst you.